Have you ever stopped to think that the worst is yet to come? Warren Buffett, one of the greatest investors of all time, isn't afraid to speak the truth, no matter how harsh it may be. And this time, the warning is clear. What's on the way could be far worse than the last recession. Yes, we're talking about an imminent economic collapse that many still choose to ignore. People think the market will adjust, that inflation is just a period of adjustment. But Buffett sees beyond that. He knows this complacency could cost us dearly, and those who aren't prepared will feel the impact on their wallets in a devastating way. The question you're probably asking yourself right now is, but what can I do to avoid being caught off guard? The answer is simple, yet powerful. Now, more than ever, it's time to open your eyes and prepare for what's to come. The financial market is sending clear signals, and ignoring them could be an irreversible mistake. With his vast experience, Buffett is warning us about the dangers approaching. But the good news is that there's a way to protect yourself and maybe even thrive amidst this economic storm. And you'll find out how in this video. It's impossible to ignore the impact of inflation when it starts hitting basic things like home construction and steel prices. Warren Buffett, with his ever-sharp vision, points out that this price surge is far from temporary. Inflation has reached a level where it directly affects the cost of essential materials, and everyone feels the consequences. Prices don't rise by chance. They reflect the economic pressures that spread across various sectors. What's most impressive is that 6 months ago, no one predicted inflation would be as high as it is now. This just shows how volatile the economic scenario can be. All of a sudden, prices begin to rise in a way that seems uncontrollable. You go to the store, and every week you notice your bill has gone up, even when buying the same things. That's inflation in your daily life. Now, think about construction companies. As steel prices rise, production costs also go up, and who ends up paying for that in the end? The consumer. Anyone planning to renovate or build needs to be on guard, as budgets can quickly spiral out of control. This is a practical lesson Buffett always reinforces. Being prepared for unexpected price hikes is essential to protecting your finances. Another clear example is the car market. Have you noticed how both new and used car prices have skyrocketed? This is a direct reflection of the increase in the cost of materials used in manufacturing, like steel. Inflation impacts the entire production chain, and the buyers ultimately bear the brunt. If you're planning to buy a car, it's worth thinking about strategies like negotiating more carefully or even waiting for a better opportunity. And it's not just major sectors that are feeling the effects of this inflation. It affects virtually everything in our day-to-day lives, from construction materials to consumer goods. And this brings us to a crucial point. How are consumers reacting to these price hikes? Buffett has some interesting observations on this behavior. Even with inflation knocking on the door, something interesting is happening. Consumer behavior remains strong. Buffett has noticed that despite rising prices, people are still willing to pay more for what they want or need. It's curious, right? The economy remains heated, and it seems that the increase in costs isn't as intimidating as expected. This has a lot to do with the prevailing consumer mentality, where demand remains high even in challenging times. In times of inflation, some products and services don't lose their relevance. Quite the opposite. Some consumers even prefer to make purchases earlier, anticipating that prices will continue to rise. A good example? Electronics and appliances. Even with inflation, there's still a lot of demand for these items, as people fear they will become even more expensive in the future. It's like a race against time to secure what they need before prices rise even further. Another interesting point Buffett makes is how this consumer willingness directly affects the economy. When people keep spending, it creates a cycle that keeps the market moving, which in turn helps sustain economic growth. But it's important to ask, how long can this behavior be sustained? At some point, consumers may begin to rethink their priorities, and that's when the market dynamics could shift. This type of behavior also reflects the psychological impact of inflation. When people believe prices will keep rising, they prefer to spend now rather than wait for a potential future increase. And this ends up reinforcing the inflationary cycle even more, because high demand puts pressure on prices. It's a snowball effect that can be hard to stop. But of course, this scenario isn't stable. The pressures on consumers' wallets will intensify, and soon there'll be a need to adjust budgets. This leads us to another challenge directly affecting inflation: supply chain problems. Another crucial piece of the inflation puzzle is the supply chain problems. Buffett points out that interruptions in this chain are causing major bottlenecks. Think about it. When an essential component doesn't arrive on time, everything gets stuck. This creates delays in entire sectors and, of course, pushes prices up. The automotive industry is a good example. Without the necessary chips to make cars, manufacturers are left with less inventory, and demand isn't met as it should be. This problem goes beyond cars. It's in almost everything. If you've been keeping an eye on the price of electronics, you've probably noticed the direct impact of the shortage of components. It's as if the market is always one step behind, trying to catch up. And it doesn't matter what sector it is. When supply shrinks, price pressure increases. This translates into higher costs for companies, which, of course, end up being passed on to the end consumer. Buffett sees this as one of the clearest causes of the inflation we're experiencing now. When you combine high demand with a broken supply chain, the result is inevitable: prices soar. A practical example of this can be seen in construction materials. The lack of supplies causes construction projects to be delayed or, at the very least, become more expensive. Anyone who's tried to buy wood or steel recently knows exactly what this means for their budget. And these supply chain delays don't have a simple solution, which only increases uncertainties. Companies try to adapt, but until supplies return to normal, prices will keep rising. This creates a scenario where it's difficult to predict when things will stabilize. Anyone with ongoing projects or large purchases planned needs to be prepared for budgets that can change at any moment. This combination of interruptions and high demand is tightening the grip. And the longer these problems last, the higher prices will stay. And this brings us to another concern Buffett has raised: the relationship between global debt and inflation. Global debt is like a snowball that just keeps growing, and Buffett sees this as one of the major villains of inflation. It's the same old story. Governments encourage borrowing to try and stimulate the economy, but the bill comes later. When countries increase their debt, the risk of future inflation only grows. And why does this happen? Because often, the solution politicians find is to pay off that debt with money that has already lost its value. In other words, inflation becomes a way to deal with debt. Buffett emphasizes that this strategy may seem advantageous in the short term, but the long-term effects are devastating. Just imagine, if you have a huge debt and decide to pay it off with money that's worth less and less, who ends up losing in the end? All of us. Purchasing power diminishes. The money in people's pockets loses value, and inflation only intensifies. It's like trying to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it. The consequences of this can be seen in several countries that have tried this strategy before. Take Argentina, for example, which has gone through several inflationary crises over the decades. Public debt grew, the currency devalued, and people ended up suffering with increasingly higher prices. Global debt is following the same path, and that's why Buffett is so worried about the future of the economy. History tends to repeat itself when these patterns persist. Another crucial point is that the bigger a country's debt, the harder it is for the government to control inflation. That's because governments are forced to print more money, which only worsens the situation. And don't think this only happens in weaker economies. Even major powers, like the United States, face the challenge of managing colossal debt, which puts pressure on monetary policy and global markets. In this scenario, the question remains: how do we protect ourselves from this growing inflation? Buffett's answer is clear. The best protection isn't in financial assets, but in personal investment. Developing skills may be the key to maintaining purchasing power in times of inflation. In times of inflation, many people look for ways to protect their money, but Buffett takes a different, straightforward approach. The best protection against inflation isn't in traditional investments, but in investing in yourself. He always highlights that when you develop your skills, your market value also increases regardless of how much the currency may depreciate. What you know how to do, what you can deliver, is something no one can take away from you. Think of someone who's a tech expert, for example. With the growing demand for digital solutions, this person will always be in high demand, no matter if the dollar or the real is falling. The skills you acquire protect you because, even as prices rise, you'll always find ways to stay relevant and well paid in the market. Buffett understands that true value lies in who we are, not just in what we own. And this is something anyone can start applying today. A practical example is investing in education, whether through courses, reading, or mentorship. Books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill are a great starting point, as they offer lessons on mindset and strategies that help you grow during times of crisis. Or even learning a new skill, like programming or digital marketing, which are high-demand areas. The idea is, the more you improve yourself, the more you strengthen against economic fluctuations. Buffett's logic is simple but powerful. He always says that no matter how much money's value changes, no one can take away what you know. Your knowledge and skills are the greatest assets you can have in times of uncertainty. It's no wonder that in times of high inflation, the most qualified people are the ones who navigate these scenarios best. With this focus on personal growth, you can shield yourself against the most devastating effects of inflation. And of course, besides investing in yourself, Buffett also offers another crucial tip: choosing strong companies to invest in. And this brings us to an important point about how investing in strong companies can be a wise strategy during these times. Investing in solid companies is one of Buffett's classic lessons, and it makes perfect sense, especially during inflationary times. He always talks about how strong businesses, those with consistent demand and essential products, are the best choice. Think of a company like Coca-Cola. No matter what happens in the economy, people keep buying. This type of company has what Buffett calls pricing power, meaning they can raise prices without losing customers. This ability to maintain consistent demand, even with high inflation, is what makes these companies a safe haven for investors. Imagine you own shares in a company that makes products people need daily. Even if prices go up, people will continue buying because these products are essential. And that's exactly what protects your investment from being eroded by inflation. Buffett always reinforces that the secret is investing in businesses with a strong brand and a loyal customer base. Companies like Apple, for example, follow the same logic. Even with higher prices, demand remains steady because consumers trust the quality and value the brand offers. This loyalty is what keeps these companies profitable in times of crisis, making them an excellent choice to protect your capital. But be careful. Not all companies can maintain this consistency. That's why it's important to do a careful analysis before investing. Focusing on sectors with stable demand, such as food, beverages, technology, and healthcare, is a smart strategy. If you're thinking about protecting your money from inflation, look at these industries that are unlikely to lose strength, even in tough times. With this mindset, investing in strong companies becomes not just a preservation strategy, but also a way to keep growing, even amidst inflation. And while these companies remain solid, a bigger concern appears on Buffett's radar: the danger of government debt. And this is a crucial point that needs to be understood. One of Buffett's major warnings is about the growing danger of government debt. He consistently emphasizes that as governments keep accumulating more and more debt, the long-term impact can be devastating. It's a ticking time bomb that few want to acknowledge, but it's there, ready to explode. And the problem isn't just the rise in debt itself, but the effect this has on the economy and, of course, on the value of our investments. When the government racks up huge debts, the tendency is for them to print more money to pay it off. And guess what that generates? More inflation. It's like a vicious cycle, where increasing debt keeps devaluing the currency over time. For investors, especially in assets tied to the dollar, this means the real value of these investments can diminish over time. Buffett consistently reinforces that this is one of the biggest concerns for anyone trying to protect their capital. Now, think about the global impact of this. If the dollar starts losing value because of rising U.S. debt, the effect is felt worldwide. And it's not just about numbers or economic charts. It affects the purchasing power of people and businesses all over the globe. It's like the money you have today is worth less and less. That's why Buffett warns about the importance of paying attention to the scenario and not underestimating the consequences of out-of-control government debt. Buffett sees this continuous increase in debt as a silent danger. And the truth is, many governments resort to easy, short-term solutions like printing more money to deal with their deficits. But that only pushes the problem into the future, making the situation increasingly unsustainable. And it's always ordinary people who end up paying the price, watching their money lose value right before their eyes. In light of this, Buffett's wisdom reminds us that in times of uncertainty, it's essential to be prepared to protect our capital, whether by investing in strong companies or betting on personal development. Every step counts. And with this vision, we conclude this cycle of valuable lessons Buffett has shared on how to deal with inflation and the economic risks that lie ahead. Now that you understand what's at stake, the big question is, what will you do with this knowledge? What Warren Buffett has shown us isn't just a warning, it's a call to action. If you keep waiting for the economy to adjust itself, you might be putting yourself in a vulnerable position. Have you thought about how small actions now can protect you from future problems? The key is not to stand still, but to take control of your financial situation and prepare for what's coming. So, what are you going to do to avoid being caught off guard? Will you start investing in skills in strong companies, or perhaps rethink your spending habits? The options are there, and now is the time to make decisions. The most important thing is to act before the economic storm hits full force. And the best part, you don't have to go through this alone. Here on this channel, you'll find more tips and strategies to protect your future and make the right decisions. If you want to keep receiving valuable insights like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way, you'll always be one step ahead and ready for any economic challenge that comes your way.